I was growing up, one of my friends, Ben, had a family beach house. It was massive, right on the water, and super nice. His family had money, like real money, so they'd go up there pretty often, and sometimes I got invited along. The place was a little old, but had a lot of character. It even had a full-time maid, Martha, who lived in this little flat in the back of the property. She was always around, cleaning and doing chores, but she was nice, kept to herself mostly. Anyway, one weekend, Ben's family decided to go up there for a long weekend. Just a typical trip. But when they got there, the house had been ransacked. I'm talking complete disaster. Furniture overturned, TVs missing, stuff smashed all over the place. It looked like someone had gone through every room, ripping the place apart. Obviously, Ben's parents freaked out. They went to check on Martha in her little flat, thinking maybe she'd seen something or heard someone break in. But when they got there, her flat was empty. And not just empty, like she was gone. All of her belongings were missing too. Not a single thing left behind. At first, everyone assumed she bailed. I mean, it kinda made sense, right? The house gets robbed and the maid is nowhere to be found. The cops came out, but they did not seem too interested. They took a quick look around and pretty much just shrugged it off. They figured Martha probably had something to do with it. Maybe she let someone in, or maybe she took off with some of the stuff herself. Ben's dad wasn't too happy about the lack of effort, but what can you do? The cops left and that was that. So for the next week, everyone was just kind of accepting the idea that Martha was involved. I remember Ben talking about it at school, saying his parents were pissed, but they were ready to move on, change the locks, and write this off as a bad situation. The insurance was going to cover most of the damage, so they were just going to fix things up. The following week, Ben's dad went up there alone. His plan was to change the locks and bring their dogs along for some company. One of the dogs, a big German Shepherd, started digging around near the backyard, close to where they kept a tarp and some old pool equipment. Ben's dad did not think much of it at first, but the dog kept at it. Eventually he went over to check it out, and noticed something weird under the tarp. It didn't take long for him to realize it wasn't just dirt the dog had been digging up. There was something under the tarp. And that's when he found her, Martha, buried right there in the backyard, dead. Whoever had broken into the house had killed her and buried her right there in their own yard, probably using that tarp to try and cover it up. Ben's dad called the police immediately, and this time, they actually took it seriously. The whole place was swarming with police and crime scene people. It turned out the initial theory, Martha just running off, was completely wrong. The new theory was that whoever had broken in probably knew her. Maybe she recognized them. Maybe they got spooked and she ended up paying the price for it. The weirdest part? No one ever got caught. They never found out who did it. The cops followed up on some leads, but nothing ever panned out. The case just went cold. Ben's family didn't go back to the beach house for a long time after that. I think they eventually sold it. It just became this dark, creepy reminder of what happened. Even now, whenever we talk about it, it gives me the chills. The idea that she was there the whole time, buried right there under their noses. It's messed up. So, this did not happen to me personally. It happened to my aunt 2 years ago. My aunt had fallen asleep on her couch one night, probably around 10 p.m. My uncle was already upstairs, passed out in the bed. They lived in a pretty quiet neighborhood. Nothing crazy ever really happens there. Anyway, she woke up suddenly, like someone shook her awake. But when she opened her eyes, there was a man standing there. Just standing at the edge of the couch, watching her. She did not scream, did not move, just kind of froze. The guy just stared down at her, then, as calm as anything, he says, "The guy upstairs is sound asleep." Let that sink in. This random dude was in their house, saw my aunt sleeping, checked upstairs to see my uncle, and then came back down to watch her. She said he did not look like he was in any rush, did not seem nervous or high or anything. He was just there. At this point, she said something like, "You need to leave," trying not to sound panicked. And somehow, by the grace of God, the guy just did it. He nodded, backed away slowly, and slid out the back door like he had all the time in the world. My aunt didn't even get up right away. She waited, listening to make sure he was gone. Then she ran upstairs, woke my uncle up, and they checked the whole house. Nothing was missing, no signs of a break-in, but the back door was unlocked. They called the cops, but nothing came of it. No one knew who he was, and there had been no reports of break-ins that night. They have no idea how he got in, whether the door was already unlocked or if he had picked the lock. The cops think he was probably just some random guy wandering around, but honestly, it doesn't add up. Who goes into a house, looks at everyone sleeping, and just leaves? I don't know what's scarier, the fact that he got in, or the fact that he just left. He easily could have done something worse to my aunt and uncle, but for whatever reason, he didn't. We all keep our doors locked now, though. Safe area or not, you never know who's watching. My high school girlfriend called me late one night. It was probably around 11:30 p.m., and I was already in bed, half asleep. The second I answered, I knew something was wrong. Her voice was shaky, like she was trying to keep it together, but barely managing. She told me something had happened, and asked if I could come over. She did not give me much detail, just said it was bad. I told my parents I was going to her house, and they did not ask too many questions, though I'm sure they could tell I was in a hurry. The drive wasn't long, maybe 10 minutes. Her subdivision was just a few streets of cookie-cutter houses, where nothing ever really happens there. But when I got to the top of the hill leading into her cul-de-sac, I was stopped by a cop with his lights on. He asked where I was headed, and I told him my girlfriend had called me, said something had happened. He looked me over, probably sizing me up to make sure I wasn't part of the problem, then let me go. As I came over the hill and saw our house, my stomach dropped. There were multiple cop cars surrounding the cul-de-sac, all with their lights flashing but no sirens. I pulled up to her house, parked, and got out, feeling every cop's eyes on me. Before I could knock or anything, my girlfriend came running out to meet me. She was pale, visibly shaking. She hugged me for a second, then started explaining everything at once. It was jumbled, but I got the gist of it. Someone had broken into her neighbor's house and attacked her. Apparently, the neighbor had managed to escape and run to my girlfriend's house, banging on their front door for help. My girlfriend's dad was out of town, so her mom had answered the door. The neighbor basically collapsed into the house, covered in blood, her head split open. As soon as they got her inside, my girlfriend's mom looked up to see the attacker walking up the driveway toward their front door. Her mom, in full panic mode, yanked the neighbor inside and tried to shut the door. She managed to get it closed, but not before the guy hit it hard with whatever he had been using to beat the neighbor. The impact had cracked the wood, but it held. That's when the guy took the tool, some kind of heavy, blunt object, and smashed the small decorative window at the top of the door. My girlfriend said her mom was screaming, but for some reason the guy did not try to break in after that. He just turned around and walked away, disappearing into the night. I ended up spending the night at her house. The cops stayed too. A couple of them parked just outside to keep watch. No one really knew what to expect, whether the guy would come back or if it was just some random one-off attack. I remember barely sleeping, just lying there on the couch, listening for any little noise. The next morning was surreal. In the daylight, you could still see blood pooled in the foyer where the neighbor had collapsed. There was a splatter of dried blood above the front door where the guy had smashed the window. I remember just staring at it, realizing how close this psycho had come to getting inside. The neighbor survived. She had some pretty bad injuries. Her scalp had to be stapled shut, but she did not have any permanent damage beyond the scars. She moved away not long after that, which, honestly, I can't blame her for. I would have done the same thing. The worst part? They never caught the guy. No one even got a good look at him. The police said it seemed totally random. No known connection between him and the neighbor. It's been years and I still think about this sometimes. How close it all came. How easily things could have gone the other way. This happened in 2017, and I still don't have a logical explanation for it. My ex and I were staying at a coastal resort. The cottages were pretty spaced out, about 200 meters apart from each other, so you could barely hear anyone or anything from the other cottages. It was around 11 or 11:30 p.m. when this all happened. We were both sitting in bed, drinking beer with the lights turned off. Only the TV was on for background noise. Suddenly, the doorknob rattled, hard. Not just a light jiggle, but like someone was really trying to force the door open. We did not have a double lock on the door, just the basic knob lock, and my immediate reaction was to get up and block the door with my body. I threw myself against it, hoping the weight would hold it shut if someone was really trying to get in. The rattling didn't stop though. It just kept going. My heart was pounding, and I pressed my face to the floor, trying to see if I could spot any shadows or feet under the door. The gap under the door was just enough to give me a decent view of the outside, but nothing was there. No feet, no shadows, just the sound of the doorknob twisting and rattling like crazy. I whispered to my ex to stay quiet. We both just sat there, frozen. And then it just stopped. No footsteps walking away, no other noise, just silence. We waited a few minutes, too scared to move. After I was sure it was over, I slowly got up and opened the door. There was no one outside. No footprints in the sand. No sign of anything disturbed. It was completely still, like nothing had happened. We did not stick around to see if it would happen again. The next morning we packed everything up, booked the first flight home and left. I've tried to come up with a reasonable explanation for this. Maybe it was someone messing with us. Maybe it was a faulty doorknob. But the fact that I didn't see anything through the gap under the door still creeps me out to this day. I have no idea what it was, but whatever it was, it does not make any sense. When I was about 10 or 11, I stayed home from school one day because I wasn't feeling well. I was just lying on the couch, watching TV when the doorbell rang. It was weird, because we never got many visitors during the day, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I got up and peeked through the window, and saw a man standing there in a postal uniform. He was holding a clipboard and smiling at me, I opened the door, just a crack, enough to talk, but not enough for him to reach through or anything. He told me that we have a big package that was too heavy and he needed help to bring it in. Right away, something felt off. First, I didn't see his truck anywhere. It wasn't parked out front like it should have been. When I asked him where it was, he said it was around the corner. That didn't make any sense, and I started feeling uneasy. So I asked why the regular mailman wasn't here today. Our usual guy was friendly, and he always gave me a lollipop when he delivered the mail. This man told me that the regular mailman was out of town visiting family. The smile he had plastered on his face seemed forced now. He kept asking me to come outside to help him with the package. I told him I wasn't allowed to leave the house, and I didn't feel well. He started insisting that my mom would want me to help, and that it was just one little favor, and it would make things easier for her. I didn't buy this. There was no way my mom would want me outside talking to strangers, especially when she wasn't home. So I said I would come out, but that I needed to get my shoes on from upstairs. As soon as I shut the door, I locked it. Then I ran to the back door and locked that too, just in case. My heart was racing, and I could feel panic rising up in my chest. I grabbed the phone and called our neighbor, a family friend who worked from home. I was crying, almost screaming into the phone, telling her she needed to come over right away because something was really wrong. After calling her, I went back to the front door. The guy was still standing there, waiting. He saw me watching him through the window and asked if I had found my shoes yet. I did not even answer his question. I just yelled back that my neighbor was coming over to help him with the package because she was stronger. The second I said that, his whole demeanor changed. He stopped smiling, turned around, and just ran down the street. My neighbor showed up a few minutes later, but by then the guy was long gone. We called the police and I told them everything, but they never caught him. I always wonder if he tried the same thing with other kids, and if anyone else fell for it. Once, when I was still too young to drive, my mom came to pick me, my sister, and our friend up from a concert at a local bar. It was around 2 a.m. We lived out in the middle of nowhere, like not even close to the city limits. The drive back was always a bit eerie, because there weren't any streetlights for miles around our neighborhood. It was pitch black except for the car's headlights cutting through the darkness. We were driving along this familiar stretch of road when we came up over a hill, and that's when my mom started to slow down. At first I did not think much of it, but when she kept decelerating, we asked her what was going on. She pointed ahead at the road and said, "I'm trying to figure out what's going on up there." I leaned forward to look, and that's when I saw it. A huge mass of people walking around in the middle of the road, completely blocking it. There had to be at least 20 or 30 of them. One person even had a torch, like an actual old-fashioned torch. The light flickered in the wind as they moved around. It did not look like a party, and they weren't wearing any costumes or anything that might make it seem like a group of people coming from some event. They were just there, in the road, slowly wandering around. None of them were paying attention to us, and it did not seem like they were in any hurry to move out of the way. My mom slowed down to almost a stop and started flashing the car's headlights, hoping they'd notice and move. But they didn't. The whole time we were sitting there, I was just staring at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was 2 a.m. What on earth could they all possibly be doing? Finally, my mom muttered something under her breath, did a quick U-turn, and we headed back in the opposite direction, taking the longer route home. The entire time, none of us spoke, like we were all too scared to say anything. To this day, I still have no idea who those people were or what they were doing. And honestly, I don't really want to know. I went to a boarding school for 6 years, stuck in the middle of nowhere. Literally a one-stoplight town. The place was on a hill, about 800 feet up, and used to be a monastery. This old building was massive, 4 stories high, including a basement with a boiler room and long, creepy hallways. The place had that old, musty smell, like it had soaked up a few hundred years of history and was never letting it go. Every student had a job, either in the morning or at night, to help keep the place running. Mine was cleaning the gym. I hated it, especially at night. The gym had 2 levels, the main floor where the basketball court was, and the second floor for the weight room. You could see the whole gym from up there. It always felt like someone was watching you, even when you were sure you were alone. So one night, I'm in there by myself, getting ready to sweep. I step in, and one of the basketballs just starts rolling. At first, I did not think much of it. Maybe the floor's uneven, or I knocked something loose. But it kept rolling all the way around the gym, like it was on a track. I stopped sweeping and watched it, feeling a bit uneasy. The ball made a full circle and stopped right at my feet. I just stood there, staring at it. I couldn't explain it, but whatever. I bent down to pick it up, trying to brush it off. Then I heard a creak from upstairs. My stomach dropped. I slowly looked up at the second floor, and there she was. A girl, just standing there, staring right at me. I've never seen anyone like her before. She didn't look right. Her eyes were wide, like she was angry or scared. I couldn't tell, but she was staring right at me. We made eye contact for maybe a second before she screamed. It wasn't a normal scream either. It was this high-pitched wail, like someone was dying. My blood ran cold. I was frozen, just staring up at her. And then she ran, straight for the stairs. I panicked. I wanted to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I just stood there like an idiot, watching her fly down the stairs, still screaming. But when she reached the bottom, she did not come at me. She turned left, ran for the main doors of the gym, and went right through them. Literally, the doors did not open. She just disappeared through them. That was it. I dropped everything and got the hell out of there. I did not care about my cleaning job or whatever consequences would come my way from bailing. I wasn't sticking around to see if she'd come back. I never told anyone about this. Who'd believe me? But I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm in a quiet room by myself. I can still hear that scream. A few years ago, I was living in a pretty nice apartment complex. One night, around 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, I was out on my balcony having a cigarette. Normally I'd be on my phone or zoning out, but for some reason, I got this weird chill. I looked up and saw a middle-aged guy walking down the sidewalk across the complex. Right away, I knew that he did not live there. I had never seen him before, and something about him felt off. As I was thinking this, he suddenly stopped and looked right at me. It wasn't just a glance. He made direct, uncomfortable eye contact and held it for way too long. Then, without breaking the stare, he turned and walked quickly between 2 buildings, heading in the opposite direction of my apartment. I went inside and told my husband about it, half-jokingly saying, if someone knocks on our door in the next 15 minutes, It's probably that creeper." My husband laughed it off, but about 10 minutes later, there was this quiet, faint tapping on the door. I froze. My husband looked at me, and I could tell he wasn't laughing anymore. He went to grab his gun from the other room while I slowly walked up to the door. Holding my breath, I peeked through the peephole, and sure enough, it was that same guy. What really freaked me out was that he was staring right into the peephole, almost like he could see me. I know logically he couldn't, but it felt like he was looking straight into my eyes. My husband came back and shouted, "What?" in this loud, pissed-off voice. The guy jumped, like he wasn't expecting a man's voice. He stammered something about looking for someone named Jeremy, but it was obvious he was full of shit. My husband told him to leave, and after some awkward back and forth, the guy finally walked away. But it did not stop there. A few minutes later, I noticed him standing on the lawn, staring up into our living room window. I quickly closed the blinds, but he moved to the balcony door and just stood there watching. I shut those blinds too, and finally he walked off. We called security and gave them a full description, but a few days later, we found out that an apartment had been robbed around that same time. The thing that still bothers me is, if this guy was planning to rob someone, why would he come to an apartment where he clearly saw someone was awake? And not just anyone, a woman who did not seem to be home alone. It just doesn't add up, and it still makes my skin crawl to this day. Hey, what's up guys, it's Spooky. If you've made it this far, congratulations, you survived. If you did not know, I have an Instagram. Follow me on there so we can connect. I also have a Patreon. On there you'll have direct access to me and can see the upcoming videos, polls, and soon-to-be exclusive stories only shared on there. If that's something that interests you, please consider joining. That's all I have for you guys tonight. Stay spooky, and I'll see you in the next video.